listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome everyone. Today I'm joined once again with my friend Philip Clift. In some of our past episodes, we've explored topics like death and rebirth, alchemy of the 9 dimensions, the model of the psyche, esoteric cycles, and yoga practice and philosophy. But for today's episode, we will be exploring the mysterious origins of Halloween. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here. Great subject, so looking forward to it.
Yes, I'm so excited. I don't know how we've went 2 years and not done this yet.
Covered this, yeah.
I'm really excited, and I know our audience will absolutely love the work that you've put into this. So, all right, so let's start off with, what are some of the oldest Halloween traditions?
Well, to start with, it's important to understand that celebrations occurring around this time of year are pagan. They predate Christianity, and they directly relate to astrological and astronomical observances based on what are known as the solstices and equinoxes and the periods in between. So this is represented in what's called the wheel of the year. Mm-hmm. So there's a summer solstice, a winter solstice, a spring, and a fall equinox. And then there are points exactly in between those that are covered on the wheel of the year. And everyone thinks it's called Samhain, but it's actually Samhain or Samhain, more accurately, I believe. Mm-hmm. That comes directly in between the autumn equinox and winter solstice. So it's the point directly in between. And that was celebrated typically as the end of summer and the beginning of winter, or the beginning of the light time period of the year and the dark period of the year. Mm-hmm. So that's one reason it's associated with so much heaviness and darkness and, you know, maybe a little bit of fear or, you know, not knowing what's going to be happening.
Right,
you know.
A lot of unknowns.
Yeah, a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. So it goes all the way back, you know, as far as recorded history, honestly. You know, into the post-Diluvian records concerning civilization. So it would go back as far as ancient Sumeria, ancient Egypt, ancient Hinduism, Mesoamerican. So it you know, every culture on Earth that goes back to the beginning of recorded history essentially celebrated this in one way or another. And typically it had to do with, you know, the dead or the end of summer. Winter symbolizes death, right? Mm-hmm. So, but also the death of loved ones and, you know, seasons, harvest time, you know, so right. Endings essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
That, like, going into that dormant period,
mm-hmm.
which is very purgatory if you think about it too.
It absolutely is. Yeah. So for people who don't know, the solstices are the days of the year where the summer solstice is the longest day of the year, and the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. And the equinoxes are the days where day and night are equal. Mm-hmm. There's only 2 points throughout the year that's true. So the autumnal equinox and then the spring equinox.
So it makes sense that our ancestors would celebrate that, as they, you know, are very much into the cycles of time and the seasons, and
they were extremely in tune to the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, they didn't have screens to look at every night, so they gazed up into the night, and you know, the night sky was alive in those days. You know, there was not the light pollution that we have now, so there was so much visible that we can't see now. So it was a big deal to the ancient people.
Yeah,
they based a lot of, their culture around what they observed in the heavens, which is an interesting example of the principle of correspondence, mm-hmm. the Hermetic principle of correspondence, you know, as above, so below.
Yeah. And if you think of just the earth alone, they were so tuned into the earth. So the below part would be like they're literally watching, you know, the trees change and it's getting cooler. And so
they saw what was occurring on earth as a direct reflection of what was occurring in the cosmos.
Right.
So,
yeah. So With the word Samhain, which culture does that particular?
It relates to the ancient Celtic.
Oh, it's Celtic.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Celtic. It's probably Druidic. Yeah, and again, it's pronounced. Sometimes you'll hear it pronounced Samhain, or it's actually more accurately pronounced Samhain.
Samhain.
Samhain. Yeah, yeah. So it's the point directly. Again, the point directly between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice.
What are some examples of ways that other cultures celebrate this holiday? And what exactly are they celebrating?
Yeah. Well, the Judeo-Christian culture celebrates Halloween. They actually came up with the All Hallows Eve, and they're basing that on All Saints Day and All Souls Day, which are the next 2 days. So All Saints Day would be November 1st, All Souls Day November 2nd.
Okay, so it's like the eve of
The
those
eve
other
of that.
holidays.
Yeah, just like Christmas Eve. Yeah. And then, yeah, obviously with the Celtic or the Druid, it's Samhain or Samhain. Egypt, ancient Egypt is associated with the slaying of Osiris.
Okay.
Yeah, the Lord of the Dead. Yeah, and Assyria, it's called the month of, this word is tough to pronounce, Arisamna.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Persia, it's called Mordid month. Peru, it's the Ayamarca festival. Polynesia, the Feast of the Ancestors, honoring the dead. Mexico, the Day of the Dead. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the Day of the Dead. You know, the sugar skulls and all that represent the Day of the Dead. In India, it's the festival of Durga. So Durga would be a manifestation of Kali. So the Kali Kali is the consort of Shiva. So she's considered the female aspect of the destroyer, essentially, or the transformer, or the alchemizer, maybe would be a better word. And then we go into the Mayans. So the Zontamak festival. In Australia, they have the Feast of the Dead and the Ancestors. In Japan, Feast of the Lanthorns. So it's important to understand that this time period is celebrated the world over, regardless of cultural history or belief systems surrounding religion or philosophy. It's just a period of time that's always been celebrated since the beginnings of recorded history.
How do you think this is like there's this uniformity within this time of observance scattered with cultures that were making no contact with each other, scattered across the globe, yet they all somehow are celebrating the same holiday and almost practicing like the same kind of rituals to a certain extent? How does that happen?
Well, again, it has to do with the fact of the astrological aspect of the whole thing.
So all the cultures were observing.
Yeah, they were
same
highly
sky.
attuned to the cosmos, So it was an important day because it was the point directly between the solstice and the equinox. So, yeah. And then there's some other stuff concerning the Pleiades and the Taurid meteor stream, which we'll get into later, but yeah. In my opinion, the reason that it's celebrated the world over is simply because of the astrological alignments.
Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if, there's some theories that, it was all that some of these cultures did intermingle before, there was like land separation and things. So
Absolutely. Yeah. You could definitely look at it that way. Like there was a common, mother culture. I
right,
guess
like
you'd
even
say.
further back
Further back. That would be an antediluvian history.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then it was sort of scattered as they, re-inhabited different parts of the globe.
Yeah, so that's gonna bring up the global cataclysm that we're gonna talk about later. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's explore a little bit about the role that the Pleiades plays in some of these traditions.
Well, the Pleiades, also known as the Seven Sisters, is a group of seven stars that are located visually from Earth in the constellation of Taurus. So right at the shoulder of Taurus. Taurus was recognized as a constellation as far back as 16,000 years. The cave painting, the famous cave painting from, I forget the exact place in France, but it's an ancient cave painting, and it shows a bull, and at the shoulder of the bull are 7 dots, which obviously refers to the Pleiades. And that's really interesting. And Pleiades rise at sundown and culminate at midnight in late October and early November. So one of the reasons this is important is because of the what's known as the Taurid meteor stream. So when you look up into the night sky, exactly where you would see the Pleiades at the shoulder of Taurus, at that time of year, there are 2 points in the year, in mid to late June, and then mid to late October through probably November 17th. The Taurid meteor stream is visible in the night sky, and when you look up, it's right at the shoulder of the bull, the constellation of Taurus and the Pleiades star system. So that's how the Pleiades fits into all this. It has to do with the Taurid meteor stream.
Right, which is definitely something you would notice with no light pollution and nothing else going on.
Oh, absolutely.
There's just, you can even see it now with the light pollution. There will be hundreds of meteors.
It's a show, I mean, and the Taurid meteor stream, it's important to understand, it's fragments of the comet Encke.
Okay.
Yeah. So, comet Encke was first discovered about 200 years ago, and, it's broken up over time, and the pieces of it have formed the Taurid meteor stream. So that comet, and maybe a few others that are not known yet, but definitely comet Encke is a big, source of the Taurid meteor stream.
Interesting. I feel like that just got my wheels turning into all sorts of other things that I won't bring up right now.
Yeah, Encke is an important term.
Yeah.
So we could go all into that, but let's.
Right, that
let's
could be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
So we know that there are lots of festivals from October 31st through November 2nd. Is there anything significant about November 17th that you have observed in your studies?
November 17th is essentially the last day for the Taurid meteor stream to be really visible in the night sky. So it was celebrated in ancient Mexico on the 17th of November. And it had to do with this. Also goes into the global cataclysm that we touched on briefly. So they would do human sacrifice at that time in order to prevent, or in hopes of preventing that particular event from happening again.
Right.
And that's the day that they chose, was the 17th. And I think it had to do with the fact that the meteor stream is kind of ending at that point. So they felt like if they got to the end of it, that they were probably safe at that point. So they wanted to give thanks to the gods, whoever,
right,
for sparing them that level of devastation.
Right.
Again. Yeah.
Which is interesting, because I think sometimes we look at these ancient cultures and are like, wow, they're so, evil. Like, how could they do these sacrifices? Well, I think so much of it is like they were scared. They truly thought that these deities, would, lash out onto them. And if they didn't, so it's like hard to understand because our culture is set up so differently, but I don't think it's like because they were trying to be like this evil sacrificial culture. I mean, it was a part of their belief system.
They felt like it had to be done.
Right. To save the many.
Yeah. Yeah. They were willing to sacrifice the few to save the many, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, that they felt like that was, I guess, the only way that it could be done.
Right. And if you think about the cataclysm, I mean, if you thought the whole world was, might go under, it would make sense. Why, okay, well, maybe we'll have one sacrifice. But I mean, there was all sorts of cultures all over the world that were doing similar rituals to that at the,
Absolutely. So, yeah, and a guy named Randall Carlson has kind of tied all this together. It's really interesting. He's been studying this for a while. He's got a great episode on YouTube you can watch about the origins of Halloween. And he has tied it all back to this, what's called the Younger Dryas period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a really significant event occurred at that time that he feels like is embedded in the racial memory or the collective memory of humanity. And that's another reason that this particular period of time is so important and was celebrated, not just because of the placement between the solstice and the equinox, but because a significant event in human history happened right around that time.
Right. And
So,
even though there's that collective amnesia, I feel like the fact that it's in there at all, it's still in the collective.
oh, it is.
So it's
It
like
is.
that could also explain why all these cultures are tuned into it as well, is because there is a part of them that's connected to the collective that remembers that, but it's so unconscious, that they might not have fully understood because they've forgotten, how it all started.
I think one of the reasons that we've forgotten is because our culture has become extremely rational.
Right.
I'm gonna read you a quote from Parade magazine in 2010 describing Halloween, and this is kind of how a holiday that was extremely important at one time has gradually devolved over time until modern day, and this is kind of how it's viewed now by most people. So this is called Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. This is from Parade Magazine 2010. For those of you who don't know, Parade Magazine was a little insert in the actual hard copy newspaper people used to read. And it only came on Sunday. And it usually had, a couple of interesting articles about, some, interesting topic of, either a holiday or, something that was socially relevant. So the true genius of the Great Pumpkin may be in the way it sends up other holiday parables by having a character seek deeper meaning in the sole holiday that has no real lesson to teach. So they're implying that Halloween has no real lesson to teach us. Is there any other day we celebrate that is as empty of moral or historical significance? Halloween exists today simply so that kids can dress up, run around after dark, eat too much candy, and scare the pants off one another. So modern culture has essentially dismissed Halloween as a children's holiday.
Right.
But it's very, very possible that it has tremendous significance, cultural significance.
Right. So what does it do to us collectively to disregard the sacredness of this time period?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it has to do, a lot of it has to do with amnesia, like a species-wide amnesia. And it's because that period of time was so traumatic that we've just kind of shoved it down into the collective unconscious.
Right.
But it's starting to resurface again now. So people are, another good quote is that, this is an interesting quote. The ancient knowledge will again abound and overflow as water upon the earth. The remains of this knowledge are everywhere about us in everyday use and perfect. So I don't know how many people have noticed, but it seems to me like, especially with TV shows on Netflix like Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse, that a lot of the things that predate our understanding of human history are starting to surface again. Mm-hmm. Some of these, understanding of ancient megaliths. Göbekli Tepe is a great example. We thought that sophisticated human culture started about 6,000 years ago, but then the discovery of Göbekli Tepe is completely overturned that, and it goes back 6,000 years before that. It's 12,000 years old, and it shows signs of very sophisticated understanding of astronomical alignment, construction methods. Just it's not a hunter-gatherer society that created that.
Right.
And it's astronomically aligned as well. So a lot of these megalithic structures were trying to point out something very specific. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson have kind of come to the conclusion that a lot of it is based on this Younger Dryas period, 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. and it's called the hypothesis is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. So the idea is that there was a massive global cataclysm at that point that kind of reset humanity and human culture. So everything before that was pretty much wiped out. And that's why it's hard to find evidence of anything. Göbekli Tepe, for example, was intentionally buried. It's like they knew it was coming. So they buried it so they could preserve it. So it would eventually be dug up and kind of jar people's memory.
Right.
When
we were ready.
Yeah, when we were ready to actually accept it and consider it as a, realistic possibility.
Right.
Yeah, which we have. There's, the internet's available now, and there's so much knowledge that is just available to the average person that wasn't, 30 years ago.
Right. And it's helping us to really see how it all interconnects, because now we have this ability to look at all the other cultures and to go to these places and see, wow, they have the same, pyramid, and a similar kind of alignment with this. So there must have been some kind of universal connection here, where
no question about it.
We couldn't do that a couple hundred years ago. I mean, maybe, some people were traveling and making some connections, but now it's like, you can Google it, find the images, look at all these descriptions, because we've had these wonderful archaeologists and scientists and all these people over time that have been documenting this.
Oh, a lot of them
can put it together.
Yeah, I mean, a significant number of the megaliths were covered up by either jungle or sand or water. I mean, they weren't even visible.
Oh, yeah.
And then they've been uncovered in the past, 100, 150, 200 years or so.
There's no telling what
else is out there.
Right. I mean, I'm looking at Antarctica. Like, you can look at some of the pictures of Antarctica. I mean, like, that's definitely something like a pyramid or something that is being covered.
About it. Yeah.
So I feel like once we can really explore that, which I don't know if they'll ever allow it, because I think that they know that there's a bunch going on there, and it would connect a lot of dots. If we
gosh,
could.
Totally. And, the coastal regions are becoming really, they're really starting to open up, and they've discovered a lot of stuff underwater right off the coast. And that has to do with the rising sea levels from this cataclysm.
Right.
So a lot of the, how people tend to congregate around, the coastlines because it's a beautiful place to live, right? And it's, you can access by water what you need to at the coastlines. And so a lot of that was covered up because of the rising sea levels during this Younger Dryas period, 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. I guess we should go ahead and talk about that since we're...
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and get into that. So, so the Younger Dryas hypothesis came about the year 2007. So hints of just such a catastrophe have returned, and with a vengeance, in the form of a new scientific theory. It's called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which proposes that a major cosmic impact event occurred at what's called the Younger Dryas boundary 12,800 years ago. The proponents of this hypothesis suggest that the agency was a giant comet that broke up into multiple fragments either before or during its entry into Earth's atmosphere, and suggest also that North America was the epicenter of the resulting cataclysm, with several of the largest fragments of the comet impact directly on the North American ice cap. So essentially what happened, apparently, and they've discovered an impact crater in Greenland. It's called the Hiawatha crater, and it relates directly to this time period. But apparently the fragments of this Comet Encke, Taurid meteors is what it's called. They impacted the North American ice sheet. So there was like 1 mile to 2 miles of glacier at that time. You have to realize this was right at the end of the last ice age. So that entire area was covered in ice. So visualize this, these comets hit the area. And when they hit it, they cause like this massive amount of water to melt. And this incredible flooding occurred. So what's an example that we know of in history of a great flood?
Right, the whole Noah story.
Yeah, absolutely. The parable of Noah's Ark from Christianity. And that is not only a Christian story, but it's in stories all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a
He's not
common
the only
universal
one.
theme.
Yeah, he wasn't the only one that God gave that message to.
Exactly. Yeah. So there were, all over the world, these cultures remember this flood event.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're actually discovering what actually happened during that time now.
Right.
So there's evidence of it up in what's called the Washington Scablands. So again, Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock do a really good job of presenting this information on the show Ancient Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just physical evidence of this massive amount of flooding that occurred during that time. And it wiped out 75% of the megafauna on the North American continent. So the megafauna would be like the woolly mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers and, the short-faced bear and the
Right.
dire wolf and all these things that we remember from that period of early human history.
Mm-hmm.
And most of it was wiped out during that time, and it happened so quickly. In a lot of instances, there were woolly mammoths that were flash frozen. So there are intact woolly mammoth bodies.
Right.
Some of them even have partially digestive food in their stomachs. So it happened really, really quickly. It was just like a sudden event that occurred and it was just extremely traumatic.
Right.
And there's also this black mat boundary that has been discovered that is more evidence to support this hypothesis. And it in the geologic strata, it shows like this black mat all over in several different places throughout the world where that type of material can only be part of a cosmic impact.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty well confirmed that actually happened at this point. There are some people that are resisting it, but the evidence is mounting more and more every day.
Right.
There was and interestingly enough, it was recorded in a lot of the ancient religious texts.
Right.
So it was a major event, and like we said earlier, there was a collective amnesia that built up around it. So people, either relegated it to myth or they're in denial about it because it was so traumatic, and that's exactly what happens with the human psyche.
Right.
When you experience a traumatic event, you repress it into the subconscious.
Right. It's like you're dissociating and you're not making that connection.
Yeah,
And it's like
yeah.
that's the way your brain is protecting you.
Yeah, exactly.
Re-experiencing.
Otherwise, you'd just be completely traumatized and you wouldn't be able to navigate life.
Right.
So you have to be able to kind of push it aside so you don't have to focus on it. But it's coming back to the forefront, and I'm not really sure exactly why it is at this time, but it is, and we need to really pay attention to it because it's going to give us a better understanding of who we are and where we
Yes.
came from.
Yes. I feel like we're disempowered by not knowing. Like I think that it is disconnecting us from
No question about it.
our true history. And then I think so many people are just walking around and like they don't even, there's no goal, there's no purpose, there's no path. Like they don't, and like we're all kind of like depressed from that. I feel like because we're not connected to our ancestors. And we don't remember where we came from, where some of these other cultures, there's, it's a myth, but they believe it. You know what I mean? And they're like, no, we are from the stars. We're from the Pleiades, and there's something about that. Those cultures are a lot more healthy, and they have a goal and a purpose. And, I don't know. I just feel like that disconnection is messing with us in a way that we can't fully understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's allowed us to develop, rational thought and logical thinking to a very high degree, but
Right.
we've sacrificed something in order to do that.
Right.
And it's the connection to myth and archetype, and these stories about the flood are very archetypal in nature, and we've kind of lost contact with that, but that's coming back, and Carl Jung is one of the guys that's one of the people that's primarily responsible for that, with his Jungian archetypes, and Joseph Campbell's another person that has kind of started to bring this side of the human psyche back into balance.
Right,
you
right. It's
know?
still very rational, but it's like maybe these symbols are telling us something deeper.
Yeah, maybe
Maybe
they
we
have.
can explore our own inner world by studying what our ancestors had written in what we thought was just fantasy.
Yeah, yeah, they actually have. They're grounded in reality instead of just being straight fantasy.
Right. And I feel
Yeah,
like that all of it is set up that way for a reason. Like we were meant to sort of be fully immersed into the spirit and to have all this, but then to become more rational and mental and focus on that. And now I think we're at that point, we're right at that cusp where we're merging that science and spirit finally. And people are starting to be like, oh, I think that this all connects. And just being in the rational mind doesn't satisfy me.
right.
And I need to go back to what is soothing my spirit, like what makes me feel,
Absolutely.
that eternal being kind of thing that like gives me a reason to keep going,
Yeah.
and that I've done this before. And
It's important to balance those two things. I mean, if you're overly spiritual, you tend to be ungrounded.
right,
And you have trouble like locking into and navigating,
right,
your daily life.
right,
Right. But if you're overly logical and overly rational, then you become just stuck.
yeah,
Like
hardened,
hardened.
like concrete.
Yeah, yeah. Energy doesn't flow well. So you need to balance those two things to be,
Yeah.
to have a, more holistic view and perception of reality.
Right. We've
Yeah.
lost that connection to soul somehow along the way.
Yeah, we have. It's coming back though. It's coming
Right.
back with a vengeance.
Oh yeah, for sure. I definitely
No
feel
doubt.
like there's an awakening happening. So it's also interesting to me thinking about like the amnesia and all this because when I did the Edgar Casey episode, I went, reread some of his books and stuff, and I'm pretty sure it was like 70% of the people that he read for were Atlanteans at some point.
Right.
And it makes me think that, those particular souls are reincarnating right now as
yeah.
we are starting to remember and like to get the the evidence again. And it's like I feel like there's something going on there. Is like where we were all there and now we're all reincarnating as like a group, because I feel like we're gonna have to replay that out somehow, but like make the good choice this time, or
Yeah.
to remember that trauma maybe together,
Yeah. Yeah.
collectively.
Yeah. Yeah. And process it
Yeah.
and then move past it.
Right. Yeah. And what better time than Scorpio season, right? To talk about stuff like trauma, because that
Yeah.
is, digging up what's buried,
Yeah.
And I think too, the reason like our culture is so against some of these things is because we don't have a good connection with death. It's really scary because when you lose that connection to soul and, you don't talk about reincarnation and things, death becomes really, veiled and you're afraid. But then these other cultures, they're giving themselves that space to process their ancestors that they have lost, to communicate with them, to eat with them, to dance with them. And then death becomes less scary.
Yeah. That was one of the reasons for the celebration at this time of year.
Right.
Is to commune with the dead. I mean, all over the world, all the celebrations had something to do with a festival of the dead.
Right. To give you that time
Yeah.
to reconnect them, to give them that moment together, and it's when you celebrate it, it becomes less scary. So I feel like when we've disconnected from it, that's where the fear comes from, is because we've disconnected from death as a whole. And it's like, okay, this person died and I just need to, move on,
Yeah.
and I've noticed this as I've lost parents and went through grief. And it's like, people just kind of expect you to just like forget that these people existed. And I'm like, I'm still thinking of them. I dream about them, when the veil's thin, I feel like I dream about them even more. And I think it's beautiful to give yourself that space to be with them and then connect with them energetically, whether you're looking at a picture or cooking their favorite food, because that keeps their spirit alive. And then I actually think it can help you process grief,
Definitely.
to give yourself that space instead of just keep convincing people that they need to just shove it aside and, just don't focus on it. Don't focus on it. It gives you a chance to focus on it.
It does. And it also connects you with that realm of consciousness,
Right.
too, that exists beyond the quote unquote veil.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, just a little bit more about the Younger Dryas period. Let me read
Okay.
this. This is a really interesting bit of information here. So the epoch, which geologists call the Younger Dryas, so it's named after a species of alpine flower that flourishes in cold conditions. That's where Younger Dryas comes from. Has long been recognized as mysterious and tumultuous. When it began 12,800 years ago, the Earth had been emerging from the Ice Age for roughly 10,000 years. Global temperatures were rising steadily, and the ice caps were melting. Then there was a sudden, dramatic return to colder conditions, nearly as cold as at the peak of the Ice Age 21,000 years ago. This short, sharp deep freeze lasted for 1,200 years until 11,600 years ago, when the warming trend resumed with incredible rapidity. Global temperature shot up again, and the remaining ice caps quite quickly melted away, dumping massive amounts of water into the oceans and rising sea levels significantly around the world. So like we were saying earlier, a lot of these cultures from antediluvian times are buried underwater, and the remains of these cultures are buried underwater around the coastal regions.
Right.
And those are starting to emerge now with improved technology, underwater technology and capabilities. So,
Right.
yeah.
I think it's going to keep happening, like as above, so below. I think as we are able to explore, space more and discover, new types of asteroids and different types of planets and all this, that more is going to rise from below. And it's going to
Absolutely.
make more sense of these objects that we're just now discovering.
Again, as above, so below.
Right.
It's an example of the principle of correspondence. So,
Yeah, like I feel like we discovered Chiron right when we were, starting to process like the psychological stuff and like trauma and healing and, holistic well-being. Like it's like it happens perfectly. It's like perfect alignment when we find these things. So I do think it's more and more is going to be discovered beneath our feet.
Yeah, as the human psyche allows for
Right.
it.
And I think it's like divinely timed.
It is, yeah. It's cyclical.
Yeah.
It's very cyclical. So the veil. Did you have a question about the veil?
Let's talk a little bit about the significance of the thinning veil, because I think a lot of people don't fully understand what that means.
Well, it's because it's, in modern culture, it represents several different things, honestly. Well, let's start with ancient Hindu philosophy. So the veil in ancient Hindu philosophy is known as Maya or illusion, right? So, or even better, temporary state. I prefer that over illusion. Temporary. So it's like a temporary state of consciousness. So like, it's a fundamental aspect of material reality, and that it allows for linear or step-by-step time, right? And which creates the illusion of past and future.
Right.
When there is actually only the present, only the now. It also allows for duality, which allows for the appearance of separation between people and objects and everything. So it allows you to be able to be an individual and to experience individuated consciousness.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a necessary aspect of three-dimensional reality. But at this time of year, apparently, it thins, and we can kind of see through it a little bit more effectively.
Right.
It allows for the cycle of death and rebirth, right, as opposed to just continuation of consciousness. So it represents the boundary between the 3D material realm and all the other dimensions. Like, we talked about, I think we did an episode on the 9 dimensions.
Yeah.
Right? So there are 9 of those, according to Barbara Hanclau. And it's also the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead. So, like we talked about that earlier, and the ancient cultures were really, they felt very strongly about connecting with the realm of the dead, or purgatory, or Hades, or whatever you want to call it, during this period of time. It's the period, it's not just Halloween, but it's the entire period between the equinox, which occurs around September 21st and November 1st. So the entire period between Mabon and Samhain. But it peaks. It's important that it peaks at the very end of the cycle. So
Right.
October 31st. Another real interesting aspect of this, the Halloween, I don't know how many people realize this, but the Halloween tradition of wearing scary costumes came about as a way to appear scarier than and frighten any type of dark entity that may appear through the veil. So the reason you wear the costume is so that you will appear scarier
Right.
than anything that might come up, right? So, and the dark entities refer to what the Theosophists call the Daevic realm. So that's the realm of the jinn and fairies and demons and, more etheric type beings
Right.
that make themselves visible as the veil thins.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe some egregores,
Yeah.
like collective fears and all that comes.
Sure.
And that's why everyone's wanting to watch the movies and, all the Gothic literature and all that becomes more popular around this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like some people celebrate it without actually, knowing why they're celebrating it. They're still naturally just drawn to it,
Yeah, it's in the collective unconscious, regardless of if you're, like conscious of it or not, it's in there and
Right.
you have access to it.
Right.
And at this time of year, it surfaces a little bit better. So that's another veil that kind of thins during this time is the veil between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind.
Right.
So it gives you access to, collective memories or in personal memories.
Right. And like the shadow stuff
Jung's shadow realm
becomes more
evident.
like it's a great time to do things like shadow work and like that inner, stuff because it's, as we move into winter, there is more space for that because there's less events and, it's not as fun to be outside and stuff. So it's a great time to start looking within.
It's more readily available.
Yeah,
It's easier to access
Yeah.
at this time of year. So, and that has to do with our connection with nature and the cosmos.
Right.
And there's an actual like thing happening that allows the veil to actually thin for everyone. So it's not just slowing down and the fact that it's becoming winter, but there's an actual, material phenomenon that occurs that causes the veil to thin and gives us access to those layers of consciousness, both individually and collectively.
Right. Which it's probably good that we're not in that all the time. So it's actually nice that it's like a season or it's, it's a small event because we don't want to get you don't want to get stuck in the shadows,
It'd be overwhelming if it was
Right.
all the time.
But when you work with that energy, then you can move forward in, I think, a more
Absolutely.
productive way because it is a part of you.
It's so important that it's cyclical like that.
Right.
Yeah, because
To
it
give
gives you a chance to decompress from it and then it comes back again and you can process it more effectively. And
Right.
yeah.
For sure. And I really hadn't looked into like All Saints Day and All Souls Day. And I didn't realize that the Halloween word actually came from Catholicism. I didn't know that until, a couple of days ago when I actually watched a priest give his little sermon on it. And so like All Saints Day, they're observing the specific saints. And then on Souls Day, it's like, well, everyone's a saint, so anyone that is passed.
Everyone that's departed.
Yeah. And
for
then
All
you
Souls
pray
Day.
for them to cross over. So I feel like that's similar, connecting with the dead, praying for them to what the Day of the Dead stuff is doing, but through a Catholic lens. So it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the Christians reject, all sorts of the Halloween stuff. I know I see a lot of critical, statements and stuff made around this time against pagans, against all of the celebrations. But I'm like, the Catholics are fully immersed into it and like they kind of celebrate it in a way. So it was interesting to me to learn more about that because I was like, oh, wow, I hadn't seen like Christians honoring it because I just wasn't raised up in Catholicism. So.
They, quote unquote, culturally appropriated a lot of the
Right.
pagan the sites. So they actually, the power sites on the planet, they would actually build churches and cathedrals,
Right.
on these points that were really important to pagans. And then they taken over their holidays too. I mean,
Right.
you could say that Christmas is a celebration of the winter solstice.
Right.
Easter is a celebration of the spring equinox, and, obviously, Halloween is the point directly in between autumnal equinox and winter solstice, which was a really, really critical time for the ancient pagans, and the Christians just kind of took that time over and they made it All Saints Day.
Right. And they were like even
As
dressed
a way
up,
of covering up what
right,
the
dressing
pagans
up
were
like saints.
celebrating.
And
Yeah.
but that like wouldn't bother me so bad if it wasn't like this rejection and just like mocking all the other people that are doing so. I'm like, but you guys are doing your own thing, so like why can't we just
Well, yeah. Let's just acknowledge that they were doing it and what they were
Right.
doing, and then.
But then they've demonized
Right.
all of the other celebrations, which correspond to their own. So there must be a link. I don't know.
The pagans, the druids, all these people were nature worshipers.
Right.
And by worshiping nature, they just believed that God was nature.
Right.
And the Christians say that too. They say God is omnipresent. So God is
Right.
God is God is nature.
Right.
So it's the same thing.
Right. So I feel like the essence of Christianity is great and it's beautiful, but then it's just like the governments and stuff, it's been taken over and it's like, okay, well, this is how we're going to separate everybody because
Right.
now you're going to think these people are demonic because their kids are dressing up for Halloween,
Divide and conquer.
Exactly.
If you
It
create
feels like
division, you can
intentional
control.
division, but it's
Yeah.
not necessarily in the message,
No.
but it's like something that it's like an on top of it, like a layer on top of it that's creating that separation. Versus just us all being able to embrace that we all have our own holidays and they're around the same time. So that's kind of a cool thing to me, that all the cultures are doing something around this time. But I just thought that was interesting as I was learning about it. So what are some ways that you feel we can bring back the imagination and folk mentality when we celebrate this time of the year?
Obviously by reconnecting with nature and the natural cycles. I know so many people that have started hiking, in recent years and getting back to nature. It allows you to start to reconnect with this fundamental aspect of life that is easily lost in modern culture. People who live in cities, they have the light pollution. They can't see the night sky. They're not exposed to the natural world on a regular basis, and getting back to that is critically important. Apparently, before the electric light was invented, we didn't sleep in 8-hour periods like we do now. We had like 2 periods during the night that we slept in, like 2 3 to 4 hour periods, and we would be up in the middle of the night for a couple of hours and being very productive at that time. So I've always found that really interesting because the invention of the electric light has altered our natural rhythm and cycle surrounding sleep.
Right.
The fact that we don't look up and see the depth of what is occurring in the night sky is cutting us off from a really significant aspect of our reality. That's a huge thing. I mean, there are places on Earth where you can go that there's no light pollution now. And when you go there, if you ever look at a picture of that from, on Google or whatever, you can see so much more stuff going on.
Right.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's beautiful. It invokes something deep in your subconscious mind when you look at that, when you see that.
Right.
And it attunes you with the natural, and it starts to attune you with the natural cycles, which, I mean, we're part of nature.
Right.
Right. So we are intended to function with the flow of the flow of nature, essentially.
Right.
The seasons, the cycles. We're meant to be more We're meant to slow down in the wintertime.
Right.
It's a period of hibernation, or however you want to look at it. We're meant to be more active in the summer. And a lot of us have lost touch with that. The way that our society is set up, I mean, we're supposed to be productive all year round.
Right.
It's just like this constant drawing of energy that we don't necessarily have. We've got to have periods of time where we rest and recover, but we've lost touch with that.
Right.
So therefore, we've lost touch with the essence of folklore.
Right.
Right. Folklore supported all that.
Right. Give yourself that space.
Yeah. Another thing we can do is, begin to recognize and attune to fourth dimensional reality, the archetypal realm. So you can do that. There are a lot of good books and movies that really access that. What comes to mind immediately would be Lord of the Rings,
Right.
any of Tolkien stuff, Star Wars.
Yeah.
The Matrix, Harry Potter, things like that are very, very archetypal in nature. And then there's Joseph Campbell's work, the hero's journey, all that. Studying the Jungian archetypes. If you study Jung's work, if you start drawing mandalas, or sacred geometry, that connects you with this aspect of your consciousness that's deeper than your typical everyday waking consciousness. And it attunes you, again, with the natural cycles. So you feel more in harmony with nature, essentially. Another thing is you can embrace some of the ancient traditions that involve communing with the elemental forces, like building bonfires at night.
Right.
That's powerful. We've kind of lost touch with what fire actually is. We consider fire a bad thing, or we've converted it to electricity and electric lights. But in its natural state, it influences your consciousness in a very, very impactful way. So that was another tradition that, like, the Celtic people, the Druids, had at this time of year, where they would build bonfires and just go out and be around them. The Native Americans did that too.
Right.
They danced around the fire.
Yeah.
I mean, it was important. It created, it's not just, primitive.
Right.
We tend to look at it as a primitive thing, but it's not. It actually does something profound to your consciousness. It alters you in some way that's significant and important that we've lost touch with.
Right.
We do the same thing all year round, no matter what season it is.
Yeah.
We have the same, we go to work, we do, we've homogenized the natural cycles and the seasons into like one thing. And it's not meant to be that way.
Right. And mental illness is like rampant. And I think
Absolutely.
it's because we're disconnected from the part of us that is nature.
Yes.
As we're forcing ourselves to act a certain way. I also feel like the smoke from fires is clearing your aura. Like, you think of people doing the sage, and that the smoke's clearing your house. I truly feel like when I sit by a fire, as much as I want to avoid the smoke, there's something about it that is clearing
cleansing
my auric field. And I think, you're dancing around the fire with your friends and all that, and you're getting the smoke, and you leave there just feeling lighter. Like
more balanced.
Like that you have transmuted something, because fire is the great.
It's the alchemizer.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're not exposed to it, you're kind of missing that element.
Yeah. Another ancient practice that resurfaced about 20 years ago with the work of this guy named HRM is sun gazing. And it does a similar type thing, and like gazing right at the sun. It's another way of invoking the fire element in consciousness. Barefoot walking is another good thing. Like, take your shoes off and go stand on the earth.
Right.
Reconnect with the earth. That's an element.
Right.
It's powerful. It revitalizes you. If you feel like you're ungrounded, go bury your feet in the ground up to your mid calf or so, and just sit there and pull in the earth energy, and it transforms you if you do that.
Oh yeah. I watched a whole documentary on earthing, and it's so quick that like it was hard for them to say, okay, how long does it take? Because as soon as you took your shoes off and put your feet on the ground, like the healing energy was like almost immediate.
Absolutely.
Like, and this is them looking at the brain and everything. It's just like, whew. So like, you don't even have to do it for that like these long
No.
periods of time. Like just every day go outside for just even 1 minute with no shoes
Stand on the ground with no shoes on.
Right, because
Yeah.
the rubber soles are preventing the connection to the earth,
Yes.
which was like,
They block it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And who knew? You
Yeah,
know, who
I
knew?
know.
Like we think, oh, put shoes on, right? Because it's
Yeah.
going to protect your feet. And to some extent that's, true, but it's also important to give yourself that space to have your feet on the ground every single day. And there's so much healing that can occur through just connecting to the earth.
Yeah. Prepare a spot in your yard that you can put your feet on the bare ground, the dirt.
Yes.
And that's key. I used to, I did sun gazing for a long time. And I actually prepared a spot where I could stand on the ground and bury my feet in the ground. So I was actually all the way up to about mid calf area. I would stand on the ground and sun gaze.
Right.
And that was one of the most transformative periods of my life,
Right.
doing that. I mean, it created a huge shift in my thinking, my perception of reality. Super powerful. Another thing that you can do is soak your body in geothermal hot springs.
Right.
We have access to it. Hot Springs, North Carolina. It's not that far from here. Drive up there and go get in one of those tubs and let that natural water, the element of water, just enliven you. It's super powerful, especially if the sun's out and you get the sun, you get the wind, you get the air, and you can walk to the thing barefoot if you want to and get the earthing. So you can get all 4 primary elements at one time.
Yes.
There, it's super powerful. And you can go soak in the cold water up in the Smokies if you want to. It doesn't have to be a hot spring, and then you get the benefit of the cold water, the anti-inflammatory effect.
Exactly.
So these type things are powerful, and they'll help you like reconnect with this ancient understanding of the natural cycles.
Right. And I feel like we're all drawn to specific forms of it. Like some people might be more drawn to the water immersion, and some people might be more drawn to the grounded earth part of it, probably depending on their astrological charts and stuff like that. There's going to be certain elements that might be more attractive or appealing to certain people. But I mean, it's crazy because like there are stories of people just healing, just doing these basic rituals of reconnecting with nature.
It's not hard.
Watching their diet, eating natural foods, not processed foods, just those little things. And then like all these issues that these people, like their neurosis just magically goes away, and you're like, well, all they did was start going outside and sun gazing. But I was watching this, there was this tribe, and they were saying like if nothing else cures somebody, they will dig a hole and put the person in the hole up to their neck and sit with them for like, maybe it's like 3 days. And that person stays in the hole, and they feed, and give them water and food.
They're earthing.
And they sit with that. Yeah. And there was a story of this child, and I can't remember what it was, but she had an illness that nothing would cure it. And they did that. And by the time she got out of that hole, she was perfectly
It's
cured.
a reconnection with the telluric realm, which we talked about in one of our episodes.
It
heals you. Yeah.
So like we wouldn't even have a lot of these issues if we didn't put the asphalt down and wear the rubber shoes and, put sunglasses on and cover our, skin with sunscreen. I mean, you can see how like the more we disconnected from the natural realm, the more we created all of these physical illnesses.
Yeah, we've done pretty much everything we can to divorce ourselves from the natural world in modern culture. There's no question about it. I mean, it's just obvious. And we've done it out of convenience. I mean, it's made our lives easier.
Yeah.
But it's also taken us away from something vital that is really important for health of both the physical body and the psyche.
Right. And there's nothing better for the psyche than to have rituals and things like that help you process these things. So that's where I feel like, whatever ritual you decide to do this Halloween, to reconnect, it can be completely individual to you. And
Absolutely.
It's just the act of setting that intention and making sacred space. That's all you need. Whether you connect to your ancestors or not, it's still a sacred time. So you can work with that energy however you want,
Yeah, that's another thing. Just take the time to honor the people that you've lost.
Right.
And think about them. And try to form like a mental, emotional bond and connection with them. Another thing that this is a very specific thing that I found while I was doing some research. It's called making a batch of veil oil, veil oil. Yeah. So it says whip up a batch of veil oil to anoint tools, candles, your body, whatever during solid season. So get a nice bottle that appeals to you. Smoky glass is really good. Fill the bottle with a carrier oil like olive oil or jojoba or, grapeseed oil, whatever you want to do, but some basic oil that you can add. And then try adding these quote unquote spirit herbs. So cinnamon, allspice, frankincense, myrrh, thieves oil. Just add that and adjust the ratios. But the essential oils are really good because that reconnects you with the natural world in a really profound way.
Right,
Because
the
they're
aromas.
concentrated, the aromas. I remember during I hate to say the word, but during that period of time where we had COVID.
Right, the lockdowns.
Yeah, that I got this thieves oil.
Right, yeah.
And I started using that, and I'm like, man, why haven't I been doing this all along? This stuff is great. Just smelling it creates like this shift in your mindset.
Right,
Makes you feel better.
right.
Because it's just the aroma is super positive, and it probably does something physiologically
Right, I think that
as
there's
well.
with
Yeah.
thieves, there's a part of it that's like antibacterial, just too. So not only
Yeah.
is it smelling and opening your lungs and things, but it's also antibacterial.
Right.
And so it's just you're putting it on you, and it's like it's cleansing
Right.
in a lot of ways. So yeah, I work with essential oils. My therapist makes blends and stuff for even different, conditions. Like when I was grieving, there was certain smells and things that would help support that process. And it's connecting you to the earth realm.
It is.
Right? Because
it's another way of earthing.
It's like plant medicine.
Yeah.
I mean, but just through the aromas, you don't always have to ingest everything. Sometimes smelling is enough because that's one of the senses.
It's blending two essential elements, air and earth, together.
Right. Exactly. For sure. For sure. So, all right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to get into before we wrap it up?
All I want to say is just don't try to get past thinking of Halloween as like a silly children's holiday, and like take it seriously and reconnect with the folk history. Don't just look at it as a time to trick or treat or whatever. But there's powerful meaning behind this time of year.
Yeah.
And we all know that intuitively. We have like this racial memory and this racial understanding that there's something important going on
Right.
this time of year, and trust that, trust your intuition around that. And like we said, do some of these things like reconnecting with nature, and, it makes a big difference.
Right. And there's something beautiful even with trick-or-treating, as I take my children. I almost teared up multiple times, seeing these old ladies out there with their candy bowl, and like they're interacting with their community. And I actually was thinking to myself, what other holiday do we come together like this? And, here's some candy. And then the kids are like, thank you. And then that is an energy exchange.
It is. Absolutely.
Between everyone in the community. So it's actually really sad to me that it's been demonized. And I see less and less houses, like participating in it, because the people that are open to it, it's beautiful. The kids are dressed up like elves and fairies, and it doesn't have to be demonic. It's almost like they've projected it onto that, but
they've made it evil.
Why can't,
essentially, but it's not evil,
right? Like, why can't we just celebrate together and like let the kids play and have wonder and dress up, because that's how they're gonna connect to it. But then we can have our own sacred rituals that we teach them as well. So
when I was a kid, you dressed up and you could just go anywhere to any random house.
And it was safe.
And it was safe, and you could get candy. And people would come to your house, people you never knew.
Right.
They would
And
just
Christians
drive up.
even, I think my husband's grandma is like the most Christian woman I've ever met, and she loves Halloween. And it wasn't, it's almost like a new thing where they just started, they've rediscovered the evil ways of Halloween when our grandparents were celebrating it in their own way. And I think even that little way of celebrating, just doing the candy and trick-or-treating community stuff, that's at least enough to reconnect with that energy at the time,
Yeah,
and like to dress
yes.
up and to play and have fun. And so it hurts me that it's been demonized to the point where people won't even let their children,
Oh, I know.
dress up or like
So
participate in
sad.
any way. So, So, yeah, well, thank you so much
Yeah,
for making
my
this with
pleasure.
me. I can't wait to share it with everybody, and I'm going to release it right on Halloween. So it's
Yeah, it
going
was
to
a
be
lot of
extra.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that everyone will really love it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Astral.
And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.